Welcome to Philosophy 15. I'm Scott Aikin.
I'm Robert Talisse.
And we're the authors of Why We Argue and How We Should, a guide to political disagreement. These are 15-minute conversations, unscripted philosophical discussions between two philosophy professors. And today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of a puzzle that Rob has seen in recent developments in political discussions. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so let me describe a totally non-scientific, barely better than anecdotal experiment.
Tell us the story.
I've conducted in the months leading up to Election Day. As philosophers and professors, we do some travel. We find ourselves in airports. We find ourselves in planes, in coffee shops, and as I'm sure you all can appreciate, in the months leading up to Election Day, it was almost impossible to avoid encountering strangers and others who were talking about national politics and the election and were calling upon you to talk to them about these things. So one of the things I started doing just to see what would happen in these kinds of contexts is just reporting about some pretty big political questions with respect to the Affordable Care Act, with respect to who should be voted, who one should vote for president, with respect to trade deals. I would say, yeah, I haven't made up my mind yet about that. Now that's exactly right. So it was very.
What do you mean you don't know what to think about these things?
Now you just gave an indication of what the most common response was, which was the assumption that someone who hadn't made up his mind about some important pressing political topic must therefore be ignorant of it. That it was an admission of not knowing, right? So, like, yeah, I'm really not sure what to think about the pipeline.
Yeah, if you don't care, you haven't been paying attention.
Right.
Is a regular line.
It's a pipeline that runs from here to here, and it's got problems of this, that, and the other. So it was automatically assumed that my lack of settled conviction or judgment on the issue entailed a lack of information about the issue. Near total lack of information.
Right, you don't know anything about it.
Yeah, right. So it was very interesting because if you think about complex issues of any kind, not just moral, political, social issues, it seems that it's got to go in the other way. It's got to be that, the more you learn about all of the considerations that are in play, the more cognizant you are of the facts, the more time you'll spend, relatively speaking, kind of epistemically ambivalent. That is not caring. It's not that we're saying ambivalent like you don't care. Ambivalent, you haven't made up your mind. That is that the lack of conviction when it comes to complicated matters looks like it's a more of a symptom of knowing a whole lot about stuff rather than not knowing anything. It looks like in the popular vernacular, though, politically we think that your level of informedness is positively correlated to your
political certitude.
The depth of your credence in your judgment, right? That is that the more you know, the more simple it all seems.
Yeah. Well, so, and by the way, this seems like it's the case, certainly with regards to trade. You might say, look, clearly these trade pacts are trade-offs, and some of them it is that we're trading off so that we can have that our trade, it looks like, establishes peace. It looks like it establishes a lot of goodwill. It makes it so that we have people who are going to have our backs politically.
Right.
And so one of the consequences is that we say, well, look, it looks like we're going to have we make certain kinds of economic sacrifices so that we can have certain kinds of geopolitical goods that presumably will have good economic consequences later. So it looks like there are trade-offs. It looks like there are complicated issues. So even with the trade cases, it looks like there's a story to be told that's a kind of a larger, there's a larger story in the background. And notice, by the way, that so much of this is analogous to the way that people have responded to the skeptics. That every time that a skeptic says, look, I just don't know what to think about these sorts of things. It looks like it's complicated. It looks like the lines of argument go contrary to each other. Everyone's response to the skeptic is, no, but you got to believe something, right? You can't just not have beliefs about this. Like, it's so the most important sorts of things, you've got to have beliefs. But isn't the skeptic reply, no, it's because they're important that I want to make sure to get it right. I know that if I start believing certain things, I'm going to have inclinations to put my thumb on the evidence one side or the other. There's going to be some certain kinds of motivated reasoning, and so as a consequence, it's because I care for the truth that I suspend judgment.
So good. So one of the one thing that's actually commonly happened in these, I'm not sure what to think cases, is you say, yeah, I'm not sure, and someone says, well, what do you think? And my response is, I think I'm not sure. I just told you what that was an expression of the thought I've got. I'm not sure is the thing I think about this.
So is there a weaker way? So maybe there's a kind of a question as to whether or not there's a kind of a mitigated skeptical strategy here, right? I mean, with some things where you could say, like, look, I don't know what to think. There are things that I'm inclined to say, right? You can like sort of inspect yourself. So in some ways, like you might say, what are the things that I'm inclined to think? I'm thinking about the things. Right? So whenever I think about, like, what do I want to think about trade? I think about trade and all the complications about trade. What am I inclined to say? I'm not looking at trade anymore. I'm just looking at me. Now, this is an important thing, right? Because I think that what happens is that people, whenever they have these certitudes, are no longer looking at the facts because they're complicated. They're more interested in looking at themselves. They're more interested in expressing these sorts of things. Yeah. What do you think is not a question about trade? It's a question about you.
It's about truthiness and what's in your heart. Not what you say, but what's in your heart.
Yeah.
I think all that's right. But note, I think that there's an interesting sort of political epistemic lesson in all of this. Because perhaps more than ever, we are surrounded by seemingly inescapable demands to form judgments.
Yep.
And to form judgments on the basis of information that's just happened to show up in our feed, just happened to show up on the screen, just happened to show up in the email that's being circulated. That is, the idea is you've got to form a judgment. You've just heard about this terrible thing that's gone on in the world. This is your first hearing about it. Do you thumbs up or thumbs down? Right?
Good.
Do you click the heart or don't? Do you like or do you not like? Do you follow or do you unfollow? Do you retweet or do you not retweet? It's almost as if the social media environment is driven by demands for non-reflective belief formation. It's like, well, had I opened up the Twitter feed 20 minutes later, I would have gotten a different kind of message about this thing. That on the basis of the thing that happens to have shown up in the feed at the top, I'm now being said, agree or disagree.
And notice, by the way, that so much of it is not just about having the view, but being on record of having the view, right? So there's
I got
so
there
many
first,
right? Yeah. That you're on the list of the people that, in the case of the good news, that you've got the thumbs up or the smiley face, and with Facebook has got the angry thing with like the heat waves coming off of the forehead. That these are all, and that being on record as being somebody who's done that looks like that's important too. Where instead of like, well, I get my news from Facebook, imagine. Then you say, well, it's not that I just get my news from Facebook. It allows me to signal to all my friends the anger face at the headlines and so on. Right. And it's that, right? And so it's this it's this more, you might say, instead of reflective judgment side, it's this more
Tribal signaling.
expressing side.
I think that's right. But I also think that there's a kind of, how to put this so it's not overwrought, a kind of assault on one's epistemological autonomy in an environment that is constantly demanding that you form judgment